Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 103 in the series. Welcome! It's lovely to see you guys. I know I missed last week. We had to go out of town, take care of some things, and I couldn't schlep all my camera stuff with me, so yeah. But I'm back now, and I'm so happy to see you guys and spend some time in the yarn room, but also take you out to the workshop where I've got tons of fleece. Maybe like 130 pounds of fleece that I've acquired for the next yarn. And I want to take you through some of the skirting and the unboxing of it all and the unsheeting of it all so that we can kind of look at it together and see what the next yarn might look like, kind of think about design a little bit. And I have a review for you. I just finished reading The Fabric of Civilization by Virginia Postrel, and I think it might interest a few of you, so I have a little review and some highlights for you on that one. And I wanted to take a minute to say thank you to everyone who's been sending in coffees, buying me coffees. It's so wonderful to hear your input and to feel the love and appreciation that you guys have for the work I'm doing here at the podcast. And I just thank you so much. So especially thank you to Beth, to Suzanne, to Margaret, to Danielle, Yolanda, Michelle, huge thank you, and Amanda. You guys are all making this podcast possible, and the behind-the-scenes coffee work that you're doing is very much appreciated, so thank you so much. So I think we'll jump right into some fleece stuff. I gotta go get into my fleece skirting clothes, kind of change out of my nice t-shirt and put on something a little rattier. Yeah, I'll meet you out there, and then we'll come back for a fun book review and maybe a couple other little things. All right. So as promised, I've got you guys outside to help me skirt the yarn for the next yarn project. And what you're going to see out here today basically is a bunch of raw fleece that has had its first skirt. And for those of you who are just new to this whole process and just getting into things, basically the sheep grow the wool, and then we shear them, and then we collect all the wool, and we've got to skirt the wool to try to get all the crud out of it, all the poop, hangy stuff, and as much vegetable matter as possible. And we do that on this thing called a skirting table, which is behind me. You'll see us put it together, and then you'll see me using it. I'll try to explain it a little bit. The idea is to get the fleece to be pretty much as clean as possible before it goes to the mill to be cleaned and to be spun up into the next round of yarn. I have about 130 pounds of fleece in the garage today. Most of it's from Kathy's farm, Seven Sisters Farm, which is Corriedale and Corriedale crossed with Teeswater. But I have a few fleece from Vanessa, who actually bought a few sheep from Kathy. So she got in touch with me, and we met up just a week or so ago so we could exchange the fleece. So I have 3 fleece from her, one from Chip, who's one of her rams or wethers, I'm not sure about that. And then Splenda's fleece and Violet's fleece. So if you'll remember, Splenda and Violet were part of the original crew. They've been out here on our pasture for a couple of years, a couple of summers, and they won't be back this year because they're hanging out with Vanessa. But it sounds like they've got a cool setup out there. So I've got tons of fleece to skirt, and the first thing I want to do is show you the skirting table, and then I'll give you a preview of the fleece that's in the workshop here. Spencer's been nice enough to let me kind of take over for the day. He might be in the background, the dogs might be around, so it should be kind of fun to hang out here and do some work in the shade for as long as it lasts. All right, let's get started. So first things first, this is the DIY skirting table, and for those of you who have raw fleece, you don't have to spend a lot of money or do a lot of fancy stuff to make it work out for you. This is something that Spencer and I kind of banged up together pretty quickly. You can see it's just a couple of 2x4s, 4 2x4s screwed together with deck screws, and then we've put basically fencing on top. And you want these openings to be big enough so that all of the crud from the fleece can fall through, but that you're not going to actually lose a lot of fleece through the table. That would not be such a good idea. But fleece will have vegetable matter, they'll have poopsicles, they'll have all kinds of things on them, and when you kind of put it out on the skirting table, you can kind of bounce it and let a lot of the stuff fall through, and then you can pick out the stuff on top. Having a nice big skirting table means that for the bigger, larger fleeces, you can actually spread them all the way out and see what's good, what's not, and get rid of the stuff that you don't want to go to the mill. So that's our DIY skirting table. We take you into the workshop. So Kathy wrapped it up this year with a bunch of sheets. So this is all the fleece for the next yarn project. Almost all of it. And Vanessa, who bought a few of Kathy's sheep, also contacted me. So we've got a few of her fleece here. One's Chip, Splenda, Violet. So it's kind of like getting the flock back together. So we're going to start in on this. I don't know if it's going to take a day or a week or a month, but we're going to get through it. Now you're also going to notice that most of these fleece are white, but there's at least one that I know of, and possibly two that are going to have some color to them. And the idea here is that the next yarn that I want to make is going to be more of an oatmeal or a gray, and so you have to figure out your percentages in terms of how much of the darker wool you're going to blend in with the lighter wool to create the kind of effect that you're looking for. The other thing you're going to notice with these fleece is that they each have a label. So if they are a new ewe for Kathy, they often don't have a name. So this is maybe a first year who hasn't had a lamb yet, 1901, and on here we see that it's 11.7 pounds of fleece. So we'll try to keep it straight a little bit to begin with, just so that if there's any question about any of the fleece that I need to talk to Kathy about, then I know which fleece I'm referring to. So here's our first fleece. This is 1901, and it is all kind of compacted up just a little bit because it was in the sheet. So I'm going to have to roll it out on the table and get the sheet out from under it. I can see already that this one, and I know from Kathy that not everybody, some of them had some jackets on this year, I think, but most didn't. So what we're going to be looking for is to get rid of especially this kind of stuff, where we've got this vegetable matter kind of really impacted in the fleece. That is a no-go. So we got to get rid of that part. And as I unfold this fleece and start to look at it, I can see that this part doesn't have a whole lot of that stuff, that veggie matter crap in it. So I want to keep this part of the fleece away from, I don't want it to sprinkle on the rest of the fleece as I try to unroll it. So these are just some of the considerations as we go here. Looks like a beautiful fleece. This is a Corriedale, beautiful long staples, you can see here. And for the mill that I'm considering sending this to, I need to have at least 3-inch staples, so that's something else I'm looking at. This is beautiful, beautiful crimp. I don't see any breaks, no strange coloring. And if you're looking at the tips, yeah, sure, there's a little dirt, but that just comes right out with washing and carding and things like that. So, all right, here we go. And one last thing right before we get started, some safety stuff. Raw fleece is raw fleece. So these are sheep that have been rolling around in the barnyard, doing whatever, and we definitely don't want to get all of that kind of stuff like on our faces. It's okay. For me, it's okay if it's on my hands because I like to be able to interact with the fleece and feel what's going on. Some people wear gloves. Some people wear masks because of things like anthrax. But in domestic wool in the United States, that's a pretty low risk. I do have my tetanus shot because if I'm going to be working with raw wool, that's generally a good idea. I'm not working with any sharp equipment today, but there's fencing, metal, other things. I prefer to be tetanus free, so I'm going to go with that. And I'm working outside in a space where there's good airflow, so that if there is any kind of spores or dirt or other things coming off this fleece, I'm less likely to be affected by it. But these are all considerations, and everybody has to think about their own feelings of safety and risk when they're working with things like raw fleece. Okay, so I'm mostly tips up here, and one of the things you can do if you're a really experienced skirter and shearer would be to like throw out a fleece. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody do that, but it's kind of amazing to watch. They take a fleece that's all balled up in just the right way, and they can kind of fling it out, and the whole thing, you can see the sheep basically just kind of like laying there. This has been skirted a couple times before I've gotten to it, so it's broken up a little bit more than it would be if it were just, straight off the sheep, balled up and able to be rolled out. But I do try to get it tips up as much as possible so that you know kind of what you're looking at. One whole side of the fleece. Tips up is the tips of the stuff that's grown, you know, at the top of the fleece. And then underneath is where you have, you know, the part that was actually attached to the sheep. And the part that was attached to the sheep, we're going to be looking for things like second cuts. That's where the shear goes over once and then twice, and you end up with little tiny bits of fleece kind of stuck at the back. So we are gonna look for those things. We're gonna look for any kind of yellow coloring. We're gonna try to get veggie matter out of here, and it's gonna take a little while. So I'll speed you through this one, probably on fast forward, and then maybe we'll have time to throw out one more. So you can see I'm just throwing cruddy stuff on the ground. You can bag it up or put it in a barrel or something like that. If you have a garden or plants around your house, it's really good for, you know, covering garden areas and things like that. And then if I find things that have too short of a staple length or, you know, they just have too much veggie matter for me, but maybe not for some of the folks in my guild, I'll put that in a separate bag so that, and just kind of accumulate it and see if they want it at the end. So I'm kind of doing a couple different sorts here as we go. Okay, so like this kind of thing. It's a lot of dirt. There's a lot of stuff really embedded in those tips, and I don't think I'm gonna be able to salvage it. So, plus it's a little bit of short staple length, and you know what? It'll be great for the garden. Get a burr.
What are you basically looking for when you skirt?
I'm looking for all the nasty stuff. Now, normally you don't cut fleece, but with a burr just on the tips, these tips are already a little felty. I'm just gonna cut them very slightly to get that burr out of there. And then see, everything else is just fine. I'm just gonna go with it. Doesn't kill the staple length.
You can see some little second cuts down there that kind of fell through the table. We like that. We like the second cuts on the floor. And the first cut, the good stuff, above the cut, up top.
Very few second cuts in here, just a few.
Now, what about this dark stuff, like these tips? Does that
That'll
just wash out?
Right out. No
in
problem.
the wash?
Yep. I mean, I'm not washing 130 pounds of fleece, but
when you wash it, that stuff will clean up. But this VM here, this is called variegated material.
Variegated
VM.
vegetable.
VM.
Vegetable
Variegated material. You gotta get this out of here.
Now, I once sent a batch off to the mill without knowing what I was doing, without really skirting it super well, and that stuff was not so good when it came back. It just ends up with all the crap in it.
As I recall, what happened is that the yarn came back from the mill and it looked really good. It looked really good to me. I was like, this is good stuff, but there were little bits of like straw and stuff in there. So Melissa hand picked out every single skein. Just pick, get all the stuff out of there and make them good.
Are you saying I'm like perfectionist?
All right, so is this the last one? Are you just about done?
Oh yeah, just.
So why are there 17 more over there? The workshop has been scented by the fleece. I gotta tell you, it's been a novel olfactory experience. Are the dogs alive over there?
Hard to say. Oh my gosh, they really do look dead. Okay, here's a bit with a lot of second cuts. So this whole area, you see all these little, this will turn into little neps in the yarn if you don't get rid of it. So I think this must have been a section that was like hard to shear, because it's a lot of second cutties. Pulling them out.
It has been cast to the wayside.
Okay, fleece 1 is basically done. I'm pretty happy with it. And as skirters will tell you, there's no kind of like true endpoint. You could sit here and pick at a fleece for a long time. But my friend Jen Geyer, who's kind of like she calls herself a ruthless wool skirting woman. Like you just kind of, you go in there, you take out the bits that you don't like, and you just kind of roll with it. So you might notice that if I were to show you the amount that's in the barrel over there or the amount on the ground, you might be like, how can you waste the fleece? It's not a waste. You got to think to yourself, when you're prepping fiber, there's going to be waste. And it's not technically waste, because a lot of this will go to the garden, or it'll go to one of the spinners in my guild who wants to work with it and is willing to kind of play around with some bits that have the veggie matter that I'm not into. So it's kind of like your own sense of how much you want to skirt, what kind of fleece you want to send to the mill and how much you want to deal with potentially if there's still veggie matter in it when it comes back in yarn form, which is never fun. So I tend to err on the side of trying to get as much out as possible at this stage. Do your best. Takes about 30-45 minutes of fleece. So considering I have like, 20 some to do, it's gonna maybe take more than a day. So I know I said no bags, but when I do get ready to ship the fleece, I store them in bags. That way it's easy to push the air out and then get them into those big, I usually use like U-Haul boxes or like, big moving boxes. Each fleece gets a bag and then I know it's safe and secure in there as it gets shipped off to the mill. So the last fleece we looked at was nice and white. I thought I'd bring out one of the dark brown black kind of fleece that we're gonna mix in this year and show you what it looks like. And this is one of my favorite sheep. This is almond. I gotta give you a closer look at this baby. Almond is a very endearing, loving sheep who likes zucchini and all kinds of apples and pears and things. And her fleece is just gorgeous. I'm not even sure this camera can do it justice. It is one of the more amazing, beautiful, look at that, oh my god. Okay, I'm gonna get it out on the table and see what kind of damage she did in the hay and the burr bushes and whatnot, because Almond is also a little bit of a troublemaker. Alright, I got through Almond's fleece and I decided that since it's taking me a little bit more time than I thought to skirt these fleece, I'm going to keep them wrapped up in their sheets. So you can see I wrapped Almond back up this way. That way the wool is breathable and everything and cool in the workshop. So I think it's time to head back inside, get some lunch, and give you guys a little book review. So I'll see you back in the yarn room in a few. Welcome back to the yarn room. I hope you guys enjoyed that little excursion to the workshop. I went back and got myself cleaned up after all that fleece out there, and probably shouldn't have because we need to go muck out the barn. The sheep are coming back to hang out in the pasture for the next month or so, and so yeah, we've got a little more dirty work to do. But I thought I'd give you a quick review of this book at the end of the cast today. This is The Fabric of Civilization, How Textiles Made the World by Virginia Postrel. And I was interested in picking up this book because it just came out in 2020, and I'm actually working on a book about some textile chemistry kind of stuff, so I'm always just kind of trying to keep up with the latest stuff that's out there. Now this isn't a scholarly book, this is kind of more of a popular kind of book. It's published by Basic Books, and the author, Virginia Postrel, has actually written a bunch of other books. She's been a writer for a number of different venues, things like The Atlantic and I think even the Wall Street Journal, yeah. And she's really kind of has a very economic kind of angle on things. So this book really takes that to task, like basically works through all the ways that textiles and fabrics from thread all the way up through actual textiles and then innovations in textile technology have helped to kind of create certain kinds of economic situations that have advanced or changed the way that cultures work. So basic structure of the book, for those of you who are interested, it starts out with fiber, then thread, cloth, dye, traders, consumers, innovators, and then afterward about why textiles. So I think the idea here is that she's trying to move through kind of like the smaller pieces, like things like fiber to thread, from spinning to knitting and sewing, to the weaving of cloth, to how you dye it and how you trade it and how it becomes this economic kind of really interestingly, it becomes this kind of way of trading, right? So you don't even need money when you have cloth in certain circumstances historically, because the cloth was just so valuable, and so it was traded and used basically like money, which is I think that's part of this whole like fabric of civilization, which is a catchy title. I love when authors and or publishers, because sometimes it's the publishers who create these titles, come up with things like that, like the fabric of civilization. You can read it like 5 different ways. I love that. I'm a sucker for that. I'm an academic. I can't help it. What I'd say about this book is that it's a mix. I found it to be a little bit all over the place. So when I read nonfiction like this, I've just read a book on avalanches and a book on botany and seeds, and I'll read anything basically. And I was kind of hoping that this book would be a certain thing. So I came to it with my own expectations, as maybe many of you might come to a book like this with expectations, because you're a spinner, you're a knitter, you kind of know something about the fabric, and some little bit maybe about the history of fabric and thread and yarn and all that stuff. So my expectation was not really to read a book that was going to be such an economically based book. Not that I'm anti-reading economics and nonfiction, it's just not what my expectations were for the book. I think she does a pretty good job of talking through the ways that textiles have become part of economies. And when she talks about the fabric of civilization, she's largely talking about the economic fabric of civilization, which, as someone who studies a bunch of different ways that science and technology works, and the humanities and everything, I think that economic thinking isn't the only way of thinking. So that's maybe my own expectation once again coming to this book. I would have liked to have felt a little bit more well-rounded about the whole thing. One of the other threads that runs through this book is an argument about the fact that even if you go back to basics of fleece or silk or some of the kind of elements of fabric, that there isn't really all that much that's actually natural about these things. And that's an argument that as an academic I can appreciate, that even when you're kind of talking about things that appear to be like just so absolutely just matter of fact, part of nature, that they're not. They're part of human culture, and we've done a lot to develop things like silk in certain ways. And she goes into some of the ways that the silk work was broken up, and that there were certain groups that were raising the worms, certain groups that were spinning the silk. It's just like there were specialization in that. And then when you're talking about dyeing and when you're talking about weaving, there's a sense of like all of these technologies, pretty much everything is a technology in a way, and all of these technologies are affecting what we think of as the natural, or even when we're thinking about natural dyeing or natural fleece or natural fiber, those we should use that word with a little bit of caution, because humans have intervened so much in the production of all of these elements that go into fiber that we've already strayed pretty far from the natural. So I thought that was a great argument. And then the last argument I'd say that really runs through this book is something that she talks about in the afterword. And I just want to read you a little bit here. She says, "We suffer textile amnesia because we enjoy textile abundance." And I think that's absolutely true. Like the idea that textiles surround us, they're so easy to get a hold of, they're cheap commodity goods now. We give them away, we throw them away, we use them for micro seasons in fashion. And but what she talks about in here is largely a history of fabric and craft that happened at times when things like wool or cloth or silk or fiber, any of that kind of stuff, it was more scarce, it was more rare, it took longer, there was less mechanization, and so a bolt of cloth would have been worth so much more. In fact, as I was saying, it was traded for money, as money, and used as money because it was so valuable. So for us, we live in this time of textile abundance, at least in the United States and a lot of other westernized countries and places in the world, and it's harder for us to see how valuable and how scarce of a commodity that fabric could be, or has been, or is still for other people. And I think she does a pretty good job of kind of trying to cover textiles, not just from a Western perspective, but she goes to a couple of countries in Africa, thinking about the ways that traders were swapping out different fabrics. And she talks about the Ghanaian markets and some of the prints, the kittenage in East Africa, and some of the print fabrics, and how they were cut up. Some of the colonial kind of textiles that came in were cut up and then re-sewed together into different patterns that would signify different messages. So she goes through a bunch of different places and times in this book. And so if you're interested in kind of it feels a little bit like a helicopter view most of the time, but then she also gets into some really technical minutia about certain things, not just economic stuff, but some other stuff. And it's those places where I found myself kind of like yawning a little bit and thinking like, we don't really need to know all of these details right here. What we need is go back to the kind of broader strokes and tell us why it matters. So there were a couple of those moments in this book, but overall I'd say worth reading, especially if you're interested in fabric and textiles. There's some really fun stuff in here about, so this is like 14th century, Florentine laws adopted in the early 1320s forbade women from owning more than 4 outfits appropriate for wearing in public. You couldn't have certain kinds of cloth on your furniture or on your body or you'd be arrested. And there's some pretty interesting, good historical stuff in here. And for those of you who are big into textile history, you're probably not going to find all that much new, factual information in here, but you might find an interesting thread of an argument running through the book. So I would recommend it if you're interested in any of the things that I've been mentioning or talking about, economics, technology, a kind of broader helicopter view of fabric and how it's been used historically across a broad range of cultures and civilizations. Yeah, I think it's worth it. It's worth a read. You might want to wait for the paperback to come out. I think the hardcover is like $30 or something. There you go. That's my review of Fabric of Civilization. I know a few of you were thinking about picking it up and reading it, so I thought I'd give you my 2 cents. So I think that's about it for today. It's lovely to have had you along to do some skirting, to think about some book reviews, and on the next episode I have a sweater for you, and I'm in the middle of a collaboration with Fairly Fiber Fun, so I have some new hand-spun things to show you in the next coming few episodes. I have a huge project that I'm working on that it's secret and I can't tell you about it yet, but I think you guys are going to be really excited about it, and so just stay tuned. It'll be happening soon. The Shorn 3 patterns are all pretty much through their testnet at this point, and so I think Shorn 3 will be launched sometime this summer as expected, so cross your fingers for that one. And in the meantime, I'm just looking forward to seeing you guys in another couple of weeks, so I hope you take good care. I hope you stay well. You can get outside, see some people safely, and get vaccines if you want them. So I'll see you guys next time around. Take good care. Bye-bye.